The Nintendo Switch is invading yet another country by entering the Brazilian market for console sales. Strange listings for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4 appear on a large French retailer's website who actually has a pretty good track record of listings. And finally, it seems that Ubisoft is bringing a huge franchise to the Nintendo Switch, and it's coming very, very soon. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about what's going on in the world of video games. So the Brazilian video game market is something that I've always found very fascinating, especially their love of something called the Sega Master System. Whenever I talk about Sega Master System related things, I get a bunch of different emails and messages from Brazilian viewers who give me inside information on how the Brazilian market was during this time frame. The Sega Master System was extremely popular in Brazil because it was a low-cost entry point for people who wanted to play video games. Of course, there are companies like Tectoy who released officially licensed Sega games exclusively in Brazil for the Master System as well, so I've always been fascinated with the Brazilian gaming market. And it seems like Nintendo is also fascinated with the Brazilian gaming market because they are finally releasing the Nintendo Switch for purchase in Brazil. Now, this entire time, Brazil has actually had an eShop system in place where you could, of course, buy and purchase games, but the only way in order to get a Nintendo Switch was to import the system into Brazil, which of course means you have to pay things like import fees, high shipping rates, and all that sort of stuff. But now Nintendo is officially releasing this system in Brazil. Now, how well will the system do in Brazil? That really remains to be seen. Unfortunately, video games are a very expensive thing in Brazil. It's more of a luxury because of things like tariffs and whatnot that raise the system's prices to extraordinary levels that a lot of people just can't afford. It's more of a luxury item than it is something that we see, you know, in other regions where it's more of a common thing. I do think the Nintendo Switch releasing in Brazil will be interesting. I almost wonder if they're going to do some sort of special packaging and stuff with it, maybe include a copy of FIFA because obviously soccer or football is very popular in Brazil, but this is definitely a very interesting story. Not a whole lot to say about it, but I just found it interesting because I love the Brazilian gaming market. So if you are a viewer that resides in Brazil, let me know in the comments section down below if you plan on picking up a Nintendo Switch and what sort of prices you've been hearing about this system. I would love to know what it costs to import a Nintendo Switch versus what the MSRP is going to be in Brazil once the system officially launches. Next up, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4 have been heavily discussed topics over the past few days, it seems. Of course, a lot of this is stemming from the fact that Metroid Prime 4 was looking for a lead designer for their game very recently, so a lot of people thought, oh, the game's in trouble, blah, 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 and it's like, no, this is just another designer being added into the equation. This happens all the time with bigger video games. And then, of course, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. There are still people out there who are holding on to the fact that this could potentially be a 2020 game, but I really don't think it is. I definitely think it makes more sense for it to be a 2021 game. We talked about this in a big video on last week on the channel, so make sure you guys check that out, talking about The Legend of Zelda in 2021. Well, a French retailer called WT&T once again has people talking about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4. Now, before we talk about these situations for both of these games, I do want to say that WT&T is actually somewhat of a reputable source. They were one of the first websites to talk about The Witcher 3 coming to the Nintendo Switch, which many people thought was an impossible port. There was no way that it would end up on the Nintendo Switch, but of course it ended up coming out on the Nintendo Switch. So essentially they do have accurate information once in a while, but I do feel like this situation, especially with Metroid Prime 4, is just inaccurate information, and I just want to sort of nip it in the bud before a lot of people get very excited about this, because really there's no way in hell this is happening. So the Metroid Prime 4 situation is that a listing went up for Metroid Prime 4 with a very specific release date of October 30th of 2020. Yes, so this website put up that Metroid Prime 4 is coming out on October 30th of 2020, which right then and there, that should just throw up red flags for you. Not even necessarily because of the 2020 release, but the fact that this game would be releasing on the same day as Pikmin 3 Deluxe, because you know Nintendo loves to release two games on the same day for the Nintendo Switch, right? They've done that so many times for every console since the NES where they released two games. No, they never do anything like this. I feel like this is just simply a placeholder listing, but it's a very specific placeholder listing, and that's what has people very excited. Look, I don't think Metroid Prime 4 is necessarily in trouble or anything like that. I think adding a lead producer to the team isn't really a big deal because this is something you see happening with AAA games. But Metroid Prime 4 is not coming out in 2020. Metroid Prime 4 probably isn't coming out in 2021. This is probably a 2022 game at best for the Nintendo Switch. So do not get your hopes up that Metroid Prime 4 is coming to the Nintendo Switch in 2020 because, well, it's not. And the other listing in question is for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. Now, a collector's edition for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 was posted on this website with a release date of December 31st, 2020. If you know anything about retail and video game retail especially, you would know that whenever something doesn't have a concrete release date, they put a December 31st listing for it in the appropriate year that the listing is put up. So that's why there is a December 31st, 2020 listing for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, a collector's edition for this game. Once again, Breath of the Wild 2 isn't coming out in 2020 more than likely. I mean, I guess there's like a 0.5% chance you could end up seeing it, but I definitely think this is going to be a 2021 game like we talked about in the previous video. However, the collector's edition is pretty much a foregone conclusion with this game. Obviously, with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild being the highest by far selling game in the Legend of Zelda franchise, Nintendo will probably want to milk this somewhat by doing things like collector's edition for the next version of the game. All in all, I'm not saying these listings are fake or anything like that. I'm just saying the release dates on these listings are definitely incorrect. You're not getting Metroid Prime 4 on October 30th, and you're not getting The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 in 2020. Just accept it and hope that we do get the Super Mario 35th Anniversary Collection because, well, I think it's coming very soon. And finally, a very interesting leak has been hitting the internet this morning that has me really excited because it involves Ubisoft. Now, Ubisoft isn't the greatest company in the world. Over the past decade or so, they've kind of gone down a bit in quality, but Ubisoft used to be a really good company. They had a lot of great IPs and franchises that, much like Sega, they just sort of forgot about. But now it seems like one of their best franchises, at least in my opinion, the Prince of Persia franchise, is coming to both the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4, and it's coming very, very soon, as in November. So basically, a listing for the Prince of Persia remake went up on a popular Spanish website this morning for both the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, with an estimated release of November of 2020. Now, this is something that has actually been rumored for a little while now, that Prince of Persia would be getting a remake of some sort. Now, the retailer with the listing is actually an official Nintendo retailer, according to translated tweets I've read around the situation, and now more and more people are coming out saying that this information is very accurate. So it does look like Prince of Persia remake will be coming to the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4 in November of 2020. Kind of weird that the Xbox One isn't included in this. Maybe that's just an oversight and it will be announced for the Xbox One in another listing for this game, but as of right now, it seems like it's just for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4. But the real question with this whole situation is, what are the games involved with this leak? Because of the fact that Prince of Persia is a franchise that has spanned many, many decades with different styles of games. From what I've been hearing and what other people have been saying online, it seems like this could essentially be a remaster of the trilogy that came out during the PS2 and the Nintendo GameCube era, which are some of the best games on those platforms. I still think they held up today, and by today's standards, just fantastic action adventure games that I think could definitely use a remake or a remaster to sort of bring the visuals up to snuff, and doing a trilogy of a remastered collection of this would be absolutely fantastic. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, why hasn't Ubisoft themselves talked about this game if it's actually going to be releasing very soon? Well, first and foremost, I still think there is time to talk about this, because when you look at what Ubisoft thinks of the Prince of Persia franchise, they don't care about it. Prince of Persia is a lot like Splinter Cell to Ubisoft. They just sort of forget that people love these games and people want these games. So I would totally expect Ubisoft to just sort of stealth drop a trailer for this with an announcement saying, oh yeah, it's coming out in November of 2020 for your Nintendo Switch and your PlayStation 4, because they don't value the Prince of Persia franchise. They don't value the Splinter Cell franchise. All I know is I do hope that this remaster is true. Like I said, a lot of people online have been confirming that they have heard that this is actually going to be happening as well. So it seems like a pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point in time, and I would be very, very excited for it. Like I said, these games are absolutely fantastic, and who knows, maybe this is something that would pop up in a Nintendo Direct if we end up getting a Nintendo Direct in the month of August. Alright, so that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Be sure to let me know what you think of everything in the comment section down below. Are you one of my many Brazilian viewers? If so, will you be picking up the Nintendo Switch when it officially launches in your region? What do you think about this Metroid Prime 4 and Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 stuff? Do you have a brain and you realize that these games aren't coming out in 2020? Or are you still holding on to hope? And if you are, I respect that. And finally, Prince of Persia on your Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4. Is this something you would be very excited for? Because you should be, because those games absolutely kick ass. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.